Wargaming's first attempt at trying to make a tier 9 light tank has gone terribly. And of course today we are talking about the Char Emily 75, and this is going to be the highlight of today's video. So let's see how this tank really fares. Of course, the machine gunner that it is, with the 3-round burst autoloader, because, you know, why not introduce the machine gun into World of Tanks, because it was 100% needed. And of course we're going to see two replays that are fantastic in terms of the players that are playing them. And now the tank is not innately broken in terms of what you'd see statistically with the vehicle, looking at about 1500 damage per minute base. But yeah, it can machine gun things. So you saw there the Progetto on the enemy team taking a full 600 damage, and this is something that will consistently happen if you come up against one of these things, because not only does it have one round, but it can do 1200 total damage in one clip. Because brilliant design. Why not bring in another feature where everyone loses 3/4 of their hit points to one vehicle? It's crazy that Wargaming keep introducing these tanks. They start off with things like introducing the BZ-176, which then is swiftly followed very quickly, well, in the same time as the Char MLE. So it seems like Wargaming's design for tanks is just making them more and more overpowered, as we've known for many years. But the different thing about the Char MLE is that they've brought in a new mechanic, and whether this will become a feature of some new French light tank branches is unknown currently, but maybe we will see them at a later date, or maybe we'll see it on a few different tanks. But I mean, it just doesn't seem very fair for things like the Tiger, which can be penned every single time, and in terms of yeah, he might have got spotted and he might have done one thing wrong, but losing what, 70 or 80% of your hit points to a light tank that you can't see. A, you can't see, and B, you cannot actually hit because it goes like 70 kilometers an hour and pretty much is just an absolute nuisance. So it's like it's going backwards in terms of balance. It's like at one point Wargaming kind of got the balance to a degree. They started thinking about it, and then yeah, very quickly afterwards that thought came through. The Soviet machine decided that nah, we like having these broken tanks that we can sell for £250, because why not? Now this tank in particular can be a little bit annoying to shoot at distance. You can see there only one pen on the AMX-13, which is kind of something that you will see quite often with a tank like this, is because at range you've got, of course, the intricate bloom. So every single time the small kind of magazine fires within each clip, well, I guess it basically blooms out a lot, and this is something that is exemplified when you're further away from the target that you're shooting at. So it's not a sniper, to be honest with you. Now, does that mean you can never get any shells as like a sniper? Well, no, absolutely not. But in the case where you come up against lower tier vehicles, like for example a T-43 that gives you his side and also the tracks, then yeah, you can quickly rack up a ton of damage. And this replay right here, picking up 3,716 damage so far, so really good in general. But is it necessarily the best? Well, no, because there's been a ton of replays on the Char Emily 75, and not only do you have to play it as both a scout and also a damage dealer, because this thing can deal damage, it's quite effective damage per minute as well. Although, you know, you sacrifice the overall damage per minute because it is very efficient at getting the rounds out in a quick fashion and being able to just pump things very quickly, then yeah, you can utilize more of that damage per minute to actually become actual damage. So that's kind of how these sorts of tanks work. Same thing with having something like the BZ. It might sacrifice a little bit of the damage per minute, but because it can whack out like 800 in one singular shell, you can end up with much better damage per minute than, for example, a Comet, which has to fire about 6 rounds for every one BZ hit, you know what I mean. But in this sort of matchup, you know, it's pretty easy going for the Char Emily, but unfortunately for him, it's been, even with the 4.8k damage that he's done so far, the enemy team are still very close in terms of the hit point pool, and it could go either way. It's down to how each team plays, and of course how this light tank player right here decides to take the next few moves. And with spotting the enemy tank, he does load multiple into him and comes away with an extra 600 damage. So it's just a case of finding the next shell on the enemy vehicles, and this is really what the Char Emily does well, because remember, the camouflage of this tank is actually fairly decent, and so you can remain undetected whilst also pushing forward into a lot of different vehicles, things like the T-32M right there. Now with an OHO, you can't necessarily guarantee pens with this vehicle on tanks like that, from the front maybe, but with the premium rounds, however, you can basically pen them if you hit in the weak points, because it only has 240mm of penetration at tier 9, which on the premium rounds is not very good, to be honest. So you have to make sure that you're playing it as an aggressive counter-attacking tank, where you kind of flank and outflank opponents and get round tanks like the OHO here and be able to deal your damage pretty quickly. Now unfortunately for the OHO, he can't quite get the gun depression to be able to hit the Char, which is, I mean, funny. So the OHO's out of the game, and of course with 0 rounds left in the game, 7,324 damage is the maximum he's ever going to be able to achieve within this game, and it comes down to, can you get any more spotting damage to be able to make the game even better. I'm going to see how it ends up at the end of this game, of course using the speed of the Char to be able to push forward. You can see 50, 60 kilometers an hour, quickly up to 70 kilometers an hour and onwards, and this is really where the Char can make up the ground and be a real nuisance for the enemy team, because not only is it fast, but you know, you've got the ability to essentially run rings around your opponents and butt them. Of course the Crusader on the enemy team does indeed farm some more damage for the Char, since he was out in the open. And of course with the ramming damage done to him, this tank is not necessarily light, but it is it certainly is no heavy tank, so it did receive quite a bit of damage from the artillery in return for the amount of damage he's done. But you can see here the Progetto on the enemy team just getting lit up, and this is really how these sorts of light tanks can be played, as both aggressors and also passive, especially with the camo factor that you can get with this. You know, this tank is not necessarily the most effective scout, because it doesn't have the most overpowered view range, but at least one thing about it isn't just absolutely insane. And unfortunately for the Char there, he does actually get taken out by the Super Hellcat camping in the back of the bushes, which is probably something he was fully well aware of that could happen, but at the end of the day it was probably just a tactical choice to try and get some assistance damage. But either way, a brilliant game in the Char, even if it did end up in flames at the end. But let's have a look at another replay and see whether or not that this tank is actually as good as this first replay makes out. This next replay is on Cliff, and it's going to showcase what this tank can do in a bit more of a brawly map, where you've got to come a bit up close and personal with some of the opponents that you've got to fight. And we're going to hopefully give you a few tips as to maybe how you could play the Char using a replay like this as an example. So the key thing that if you either A, come up against one, or B, come again, or actually are playing it, is to know the strengths and weaknesses. And hopefully the first replay gave you a little bit of a rundown of the tank, and in this one we're going to kind of hopefully give you an idea as to how you can play yourself against something like this. Now, the enemy team obviously getting spotted early on, and in something like the Char, what the great thing about it is that enemy light tanks like an RU-251 may only be able to get one shell into you for every 2 clips that you fire off at them, so you can deal 1200 damage for every maybe 240 they shoot at you. And if you come out with a trade like you just saw there, not even a single hit point of damage was done by the RU to the Char. So it's really down to kind of being very opportunistic as to how you approach the situation that you're going to come into, because remember, you do have a very long reload, so 36 seconds is no short reload to really kind of pump out damage against opponents, because, you know, once you've fired your 1200 damage, you're waiting around for a long time to really push out any more. Now, you're seeing here the projectile on the enemy team sitting out in the open, and with the premium rounds looking down into him, it's pretty much an easy pen, and all 3 rounds land quite easily, and then some more rounds coming in quite quickly after picking up another 1200 damage as well. So 2163 damage done in total, and a very good result so far. But at this point, you know, you can play very passively. So what sort of thing do you need to be thinking of when actually aggressing with a light tank like this, if you are an aggressive light tank player in the first place? And that's really what this is showing, is that, you know, you can peak with this vehicle. You do have a decent amount of gun depression, nothing outrageous, but certainly enough to be able to kind of push out maybe some on to opponents over ridge lines and that sort of thing. And so that's really where I think this tank comes in clutch, and where you can maybe come up against other vehicles that just don't quite have it. Now, noting that the Foch 155 on the enemy team is out in the open, he's remaining to keep calm and actually just avoid taking the shell, because he has no idea if the Foch 155 is going to snap towards him and pen him somehow and what have you. So he's just going to wait here and just determine how the game's going to go, and maybe a tank like the Barask, who's kind of YOLO'd up the hill, is going to be a pain in the arse for him. So he's just waiting now. Considering that the Foch is now out in the open, and with the rounds that this tank has, it's time to pump the side, and of course 2 rounds connect for 460 damage, and the Foch is thinking, uh-oh, this is not a good scenario. And this is really where you want to keep your opponents, because they always wonder where you're coming from in the char, since you are literally able to come from any direction due to the speed and mobility, and also just due to the camo and concealment that you can run. I highly recommend running a concealment build in this thing, because although you can buff the damage per minute of the vehicle, considering it's so bad, maybe it's better to focus on the mobility aspects and the camo of this vehicle. But, you know, you could run it as more of a damage per minute build to just improve it slightly, but in essence, this is supposed to be more of a light tank, which can deal damage as and when it needs to, but can also spot for the team. Now, Cliff is not particularly the best spotting map for World of Tanks, so you're not really going to spot a whole deal on this, but either way, it can definitely be a map where you can gain some spotting at the later stages as the enemy tank destroyers kind of gets detected back in K5 or an A5, and that's really where you're hoping to get some assistance within the game. Now, having noted that there's 24 rounds left in this vehicle, and considering that every single one of the kind of pumps is actually one of the rounds that you can fire in the game, then, you know, they quickly run out, and hence why we saw the run out of ammunition last game. But the good thing about the char is, because you're hitting 3 times in one salvo, is that you can have tripled the chance of blowing off the turret of some of the opponents, and you could see that there against the Standard B. Now, really unfortunate for the Standard B to have come into contact with the char, but that's pretty much every tank in the game at the moment. Even things like the BZ fear the wrath of the YOLO wagon char that comes in and pumps them for 1200 damage. So it's certainly becoming a real problem, I think, and the tank design that Wargaming keep producing with these tanks in is just disgusting, and it's really a pain in the backside for most people. Like, it's not exactly very fun to come up against things like the char, so it's something I'd love to see just being countered and counter-designed, or just removed from their design processes. But, you know, it's Wargaming, they're going to do whatever the hell they want to do, and unfortunately we're going to have to put up with tanks like this, especially considering the fact that they are only available in loot boxes, because yay, why wouldn't you want to kind of lock it up behind a paywall and say you have to pay £250 to be able to actually pick up this tank guaranteed, because you can't just buy it, and if you want to buy it you're going to have to wait 6 months to be able to purchase it in the store. But hey ho, you know, it is what it is. We'll just have to shut up and put up with it. And of course, that's what Wargaming's mantra is now at this point. But at this point in the game, 5,600 damage done with 12 kind of rounds left. The maximum damage you're going to really look at, if you pen every single one, is only 2,400. So it's not particularly the best result in terms of having to carry at this point in the game. So that's where you've got to rely on your team to be able to help you out. But luckily, the Shah is actually helping out his team with the Foch 155, who decided to YOLO the friendly Foch 155. So, one clip loaded, or at least one burst loaded, one fired, and with a TNH and a Super Conqueror unknown within unknown origins, you really don't know what to do and to expect. So he does appear to spot the TNH 105, and of course that is a pretty meaty tank in terms of taking a few hits, but luckily he doesn't have to, because he's using the spotting mechanics to actually out-spot the TNH, although, you know, he doesn't actually manage to avoid any damage entirely, because as soon as he starts firing, the Shah on the enemy team does indeed focus him down. But with a decent chunk of damage done, 6,000 at this point, it's now a case of just lighting up the last opponents for his team. There's a Foch 155 in support, there's a Scorpion G and a 705 left on the team, for those of you with keen eyes. I'm sure you already know, but either way, the Super Conqueror is a tank that you want to get rid of, because if he ever finds you on a ridgeline, it's going to be curtains, and considering you really do need to get up from behind that tank to really have a good chance of penning every single time, it's really down to making sure that you don't do anything silly and YOLO off the cliff or something stupid, because it's at this point in the game where it could all be curtains, and of course with the state of the friendly tanks still camping in the base, and with a heavy tank like the 705 still sat in base, yeah, you just hope that the team don't end up throwing it. But a lovely 3 rounds connecting to the back of the Super Conqueror, and a final 3 rounds land into the back of the Super Conqueror, again finishing off the game with 7,100 damage. And now it's a case, as with the previous game, of just hit and hope that the 705A that's been camping the entire game does indeed remain to camp. And for some unknown reason, the enemy kind of tank YOLOs out into the front of the 705, which is the Progetto, and so now it's a case of trying to cap, and so gets into the cap. So the game pretty much closes out with the 705A not deciding to push out against the Shah, and with a victory down to the cap. So either way, a brilliant result, although a bit of an anticlimactic ending. But at the end of the day, this tank is very, very powerful, but is limited very much by the amount of ammunition that it carries, unfortunately. But if you were to combine both the actual damage that you can deal as well as the spotting damage, then the Shah MLE 75 is certainly a force to be reckoned with, especially considering the abilities of the speed as well as the pump mechanic and just being able to out-traverse. Yeah, it can be definitely a bane of most heavy tanks at tier 9 and 10. Yeah, it's not a fun tank to play against, and unfortunately Wargaming decided that this was to be locked behind a paywall as well, so brilliant. Of course, hopefully if you did enjoy this video, you subscribe to the channel, as it massively helps out the channel, and hopefully you'll join me in the next few videos that are coming on the channel and you enjoyed this one. Make sure to leave a like and dislike if you didn't like it. Let me know what you'd like me to change, if anything, and yeah, I hope I see you in the next video. Goodbye.